The Newhall House Hotel was once touted as one of the finest establishments in Milwaukee. When Newhall opened its doors in 1857, it proudly stood as a symbol of class and refinement. The hotel tragically met its demise to a fire in 1883, which took at least 70 lives, most of which were employees living at the hotel. Like me, you may be wondering, what did people eat at the hotel? The answer is fine French dining. Today we're talking about a dish which was once served at one of the classiest hotel establishments in late 1800s Milwaukee, Fricassee of Young Chicken à la Chevalière. This time on Forking Over History, Newhall House Hotel edition. One of the most enticing aspects of visiting such a grand hotel at that time was the world-class food it served. Up until the mid-1800s, and prior to the opening, the only option to eat out in town were taverns like the Hawk's Inn. Normally, these places would serve wine, beer, and simple ready-to-eat foods like cheese, meats, and bread. We chose to recreate this dish not only as a challenge to recreate a historical dish, but also because it sounded tasty. Being a chicken dish, it could have very well been one of the most popular served dishes on the Newhall House menu. Many of the dishes served at the Newhall House Hotel were traditional French recipes with a touch of luxury, such as breaded and broiled tenderloins of beef à la marchal meaning in the style of a military marshal, possibly another fancy way of preparing a dish, baked veau au vin, garnished with stewed veal, and baked macaroni with Gruyere cheese French style. The hotel served meals 4 times a day, breakfast in the early morning, dinner during midday, tea in the later afternoon, and supper late at night. Meals will be prompt and no gong sounded, according to the menu. Gentlemen having extra meals will please report to the office. Meals sent to rooms charged extra. When it comes to the recipe we chose, Fricassee of Young Chicken à la Chevalière, we had to do some research. Since there were no specific ingredients listed on the menu underneath this dish, we referenced a recipe from the most popular French-American cookbook at that time, La Cuisine Française, French Cooking for Every Home, Adopted to American Requirements by François Tandy. Fun fact, in his book, Tandy noted that he was chef to the late Emperor of France, Napoleon III, and of the late Tsar of Russia. This recipe of fricassee du poulet, or fricassee of chicken, makes 5 servings. It calls for 2 young chickens or hens, 2 onions, 2 carrots, half a handful of parsley, 1 tablespoonful of flour, 2 tablespoonfuls of butter, 2 tablespoonfuls of milk, and 2 egg yolks. First, soak the chicken in cold water for about half an hour. Then place it in a shallow stew pan with 2 onions sliced, 2 carrots cut in 4, half a handful of parsley. Cover with water and allow to cook slowly until tender, about 1 to 2 hours. Next, drip the chickens and place them in a saucepan in which you have melted 2 tablespoonfuls of butter mixed with 2 tablespoonfuls of flour. Stir well and add through a strainer the stock in which the chickens have been boiled. Then, when ready to serve, place the saucepan on the corner of the range and add 2 yolks beaten with 2 tablespoonfuls of milk. Serve in a hollow dish with rice à la Georgienne apart. The star of this dish is the sauce. One of the fundamental techniques in French cooking is the roux used in this recipe, which is simply a mixture of fat and flour that is cooked together. When done correctly, a roux produces a flavorful, thickening base for sauces. This simple chicken dish could be served at a French-style restaurant today. For this recipe, we used 1 whole natural chicken in place of the 2 small young chickens. This dish was part of the entree section of the menu, which likely would have been ordered after an appetizer of soup or vegetables, and eaten with one of the many wines or ales listed on the menu. To make this recipe, what you'll need is 1 whole chicken, 2 onions sliced thin, 2 carrots cut into 4 pieces each, parsley tied, 1 tablespoon of flour, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of milk, 2 egg yolks. Step 1 is to soak your chicken in cold water, let it sit for 30 minutes. Step 2, slice 2 onions thin, as well as 2 carrots into 4 pieces each. Step 3, place your chicken in a stew pan with all your chopped vegetables and a handful of parsley, then cover with water. You may season the chicken with salt and pepper if you so choose. Step 4, place the chicken in an oven preheated to 425 and set a timer for 1 1/2 hours. While we wait for that to roast, let's talk more about the hotel's history. 19th century America was a time of rapid population growth and land development. In search of opportunity, immigrants began to move further west. Milwaukee was greatly sought after for its potential to become a port city for the fur trade due to its advantageous location on Lake Michigan. In the year 1846, when Milwaukee had its first mayor, a fur trader and businessman named Solomon Juneau, the population was measured at 9,508. As more migrants and entrepreneurs settled in and visited Milwaukee, the demand for comfortable accommodations such as hotels grew as well. Newhall House Hotel, Milwaukee historian and Marquette librarian Matt Pridgie can explain what happened.
Milwaukee was developing as a city through the 1840s and the 1850s. There was this real rivalry with Chicago. Daniel Newhall came from the East. He came here to make a fortune. He ended up getting involved in the grain trade. He really became one of the biggest figures in grain trading in the Midwest. And that was the fortune that he used to end up building the Newhall House. The rivalry was pretty one-sided on Milwaukee trying to keep up with Chicago. And part of this was this idea that, Chicago had all these really nice first-class premier hotels. The opening of the Newhall House was a big event in Milwaukee, probably one of the biggest events in city history at the time. They had an open house for several days before the actual grand opening, where I think in one day something like a quarter of the city's population toured the hotel. They were able to walk through it and just look around. And then the night it actually opened was this gala affair. They had bands and they had dancing and they had this huge feast that was served. They invited every newspaper editor in Wisconsin to come and look at the hotel. Any political dignitaries that were nearby were invited. And it was really this huge celebration, again, of kind of Milwaukee elevating itself to the level of, not just Chicago, but, a lot of the conversation about the hotel compared it to the finest hotels of New York, of the East Coast. To my knowledge, there's only one photo of the interior of the hotel that survives, and it's it's of the lobby, and it's looking down the hall toward one of the big spiral staircases that they had. There's artwork on the walls, very fine carpeting. Everything is very nicely appointed. The hotel had its own library. At the time, public libraries, that really wasn't a concept yet. The dining area, the way meals were served in hotels at that time, they had a communal dining area, so everybody ate all at once. A lot of emphasis was put on the dining at the hotel. They imported a chef from New York who was very skilled in French cooking. They had a bar that was stocked with all these imported liquors. Any bit of luxury that you'd find anywhere in an accommodations elsewhere, the Newhall tried to replicate. They had this cupola, which you could, it offered a 360-degree view. Most people would have arrived at the hotel either on foot or by a carriage, horse-drawn carriage. By the time you're at the front desk, there would have been somebody to check you in, there would have been somebody to take your luggage, somebody to drive the elevator up to your room for you. There would have been somebody at your beck and call pretty much around the clock. It became kind of the hotel for performers, for actors, for magicians, ventriloquists, who was ever coming through the city to do a stage show. One of probably the most notable visitor of all was Abraham Lincoln before he became president, gave a speech at the Newhall House. For the most part, the men who worked at the hotel just worked there. They lived elsewhere. The female staff, they were largely responsible for kitchen duties, for laundry duties, housekeeping, they lived in the hotel. They lived on the 5th floor of the building. And that was, just a product of the times. And these women are almost always referred to as girls. They were not married. So even if they were 40 years old, they were girls. That was just how the society largely viewed this at the time.
Newhall House Hotel opened in 1857, and just 3 years later, the population was measured at 45,246, more than tripling in size. In the beginning, the hotel stood as a symbol of growth for Milwaukee. Unfortunately, it wasn't long before Milwaukee's towering 6-story hotel began to operate in a financial decline.
It became pretty apparent early on that Newhall had kind of overextended himself. It became pretty obvious within the first year that the hotel was open that Milwaukee wasn't quite ready to have a hotel like this. He ended up selling it off to, one of a number of partnerships of various businessmen who would run it over the next couple of decades. They cycle through a few other operators. Eventually, they get a lease with a man named John Antistel from Detroit. He comes, and he's really the first one he runs it for longer than anyone else ran it. And seems to be the first one to really consistently generate at least some kind of profit. He brought with him from Detroit a man named George Scheller, also a veteran hotel fellow from Detroit. Scheller became the head clerk, which was, a position of esteem for a hotel at that time. Over the years, there were a number of other fires at the Newhall. This really wasn't an uncommon thing. Buildings had fires then. Everything was made of wood. The origin of some of those fires was somewhat suspicious. There wasn't a lot of talk that was recorded at the time about these fires being suspicious. There were stories of, somebody trying to set a fire in the basement by sticking oily rags into a hole in the wall. You weren't going to catch an arsonist in this era. So if you were inclined to enjoy setting things on fire, you could kind of have your way with things. So I suspect that a lot of these fires, if they were arson, were just set by people who wanted to set things on fire. So in the couple of months before the fire, George Scheller was really in rough shape. He had, at the time, a pretty significant drinking problem. He was drinking a lot. just in very rough shape. To the point where John Antestel had actually dismissed him from his job as a head clerk, but still took enough pity on him to let him take over the pool hall that was in the Newhall House's basement. Even on the day before the fire, like he had scolded him about his drinking. He'd begged him to get himself together, because Chevalière at this point was he was near rock bottom. He was drinking all day long. He was kind of openly begging people for money to pay off some of his debts. He was just in bad shape. Even to the point where he'd run into somebody before dinner and was just walking dead drunk at that point already. On the night of the fire, there was the man who was popularly known as General Thumb was staying there. His real name was Charles Stratton. He had been discovered by P.T. Barnum when he was a young man. As far as the staff that was on that night, there was a man at the front desk, the guy who was running the elevator, and then there was the boiler operator in the basement. After dinner, well after most people have gone to sleep, and then Chevalière was in the basement tending bar. Yeah, it was past 3 a.m. when they first detected the fire. The elevator operator / porter was driving the elevator car down. He noticed smoke coming up through the floor of the elevator. So he stopped the elevator, ran to the front desk, got the clerk, and said, "There's a fire in the basement." They call the boiler operator, who was in another part of the basement, where there was no smoke yet. He might have had a shot at damping down the fire a little bit, because he got to a fire hose that was on the wall. The smoke became too much, and he was also forced back upstairs. They had realized that they weren't going to be able to get any water on this fire themselves. Probably by that time, the fire had already claimed its first victim. The fact that it started at the bottom of the elevator shaft is, the real thing that made this guaranteed to be a horrible tragedy. The wood had to be oiled, so this is, a highly flammable flue that is going to, again, make sure that this fire spreads instantly.
The fire quickly spread throughout the building. Unfortunately, most of the people who lost their lives to the fire were hotel employees who lived on the top floor, many of whom were asleep in bed when the fire started. There were suspicions that it was an act of arson.
While the chicken is roasting, let's make the rice a la Georgienne. The recipe for this is quite simple. It's cooked rice with tomato and onion. For this, you'll need a cup of rice and cook it according to the packaging. While the rice is cooking, take some diced tomato and sauté it along with half a diced onion. Once the rice is nearly done, add it to your sautéed vegetables and let it cook for about 2 minutes. And there you have it, rice a la Georgienne. Our chicken is done roasting, so let's remove that from the oven and start making the sauce. To make a roux, combine your 2 tablespoons of butter with flour and let it cook until it reaches a caramel color. Then add your drippings to make the sauce. Lastly, to thicken the sauce further, add in 2 egg yolks whisked together with the 2 tablespoons of milk. The recipe for this dish does not specify how to serve it a la Chevalière style. The French word Chevalière means knight. Upon some searching, to serve a dish this way meant to add some sort of ornate garnish and rich sauces which reflect the opulence of the term. With the rich sauce and garnish completed, I shall imagine that I am one of the refined residents of Newhall, enjoying a nice hot meal, which is now ready to eat.
George Scheller, the keeper of the Newhall's pool hall and bar, was accused of starting the fire. All the evidence seemed to point at him. Unfortunately, Newhall was a well-known fire trap, but so was every other building in town. The importance of fire safety was largely deprioritized until 28 years later, when the Manhattan Triangle Shirtwaist Factory took the lives of 146 people. Until then, fires were a common occurrence and seemed inevitable. People felt that the Newhall fire was bound to happen. Hopefully, the victims of the fire were able to have one last comforting meal on that cold January night.
One of the real failures, the failure on the part of the people who were working that night, was that they didn't wake up any of the guests. You know, the three men who were in the building, one of them actually had a sister who was one of the women who lived in the hotel up on the 5th floor. So he tried to go up there to wake up the women who lived in that hall, but didn't really have much success with it. It was in the middle of the night. Everybody was dead asleep. He did what he could, but it just didn't register with people up there. The other two staff who were on duty that night, you know, they'd later claim that they knocked on some doors, but there's no evidence that they did. A lot of people either jumped or fell out of their windows that night. There were jumping nets for people to, you know, like they did in the old cartoons. You jump out of a burning building and you land in this big net. Those actually require like 30 people to securely hold because of just the force of the person actually landing in the middle of it. You know, the instances of the jumping sheets being used that night, they were held by like 7 or 8 people. For the most part, the people fell right through those. I mean, it was an absolute nightmare in the streets watching all this unfold. One of the real tragedies was that the hall where all the women who lived there worked, they were kind of trapped up there. So a lot of those women, unfortunately, were pushed back to the windows in their room overlooking that alleyway. 12 or 13 just jumped out of desperation. There was a couple of firefighters who did some very, very heroic life-saving for those women who were trapped there by actually going to the building across the alleyway and throwing a ladder across the alley to the window. A brave act in itself, but then the women who were trapped in there actually were the ones who had to walk across, 70 feet in the sky from one burning building to another. The immediate suspicion fell on George Scheller. It was pretty much all circumstantial. It was known that he needed money. It was known that he was drinking very heavily. After he'd closed up his bar that night, probably around somewhere after 2 a.m., he met up with some friends, he played some cards, and then from there, he asked some of his friends if they wanted to go back to the Newhall to finish off a bottle of wine. And he later lied to police about whether or not he went back to the hotel that night. Unclear as to why he made that lie. The fact that he looked like he was trying to cover up the fact that he had been in the building shortly before the fire started. That led to a lot of speculation on him, especially right after the fire. People were, they really wanted to find somebody to pin this on. The immediate thought was that this had been set on purpose. When the police finally arrested Scheller, and the days after the fire, he went on a real bender, even worse than he had been going on before. His attitude and just everything about him screamed, somebody who was in a very desperate way and would have done something. People were expecting, the smoking gun, if you will. And that never materialized. Even in the trial, it was very clear that the prosecution was really just kind of grasping at straws with this. People testified that he was trying to invite, get friends to go back with him to have some more wine. If you're gonna set a fire, why are you inviting people over to watch you do it? So they never actually found the source of the fire.
Our meal is now ready to eat. Bon appetit. Absolutely delicious. French cuisine is often considered to be elegant in its stature among the world. And while the Newhall House may be gone, the hotel's history and its food have not been forgotten. So next time you walk the streets of Milwaukee, take a moment to appreciate the technology and advancements we've made both in fire safety and prevention. We hope that your curiosity has been unlocked to learn more about the similarities between people who lived during the fire and our current generation. Thank you for watching. I'm Andrew Stern. This has been Forking Over History.